Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of the NAIC Insight Series. I'm your host, Bob Green, and I'm delighted to be joined today by John Winkelried, the CEO of TPG. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
It's great having you. John, this was a momentous month in your life. You were named the sole CEO of TPG this month after about 5 years of being co-CEO. What's that like?
Well, it's not a lot of change, to be honest, because I think this change was more or less a natural evolution of Jim and I partnering together for 5.5 years. They think to frame it, I came into a leadership role in a firm where I didn't really know anybody, and so making that work really required, I think, a strong partnership between Jim and I, and a decent amount of investment and time and energy, and developing relationships internally with my partners. And we've gotten to a point now after 5.5 years where the firm has grown a lot and we have a lot of opportunity. And I think both of us agree that there's a couple of things going on. One is really time for us to really focus on kind of highest and best use, if you will, to the firm. And I think we have different skills. And so I think we can be of greater value to the firm in different roles. And then the other dynamic in our firm is that the culture is very much of a producer manager culture. Yeah. We try to keep it flat. So it's very much a producer manager culture. And so I think we're both trying to find ways of continuing to lead, but also stay very integrated into the business.
Outstanding. Give us a little overview of what the firm looks like now. How many employees, assets, offices? What does it look like?
About $100 billion in assets, about 1,000 employees globally. We a couple of hundred portfolio companies across the platform. A series of businesses from large cap buyout style private equity, growth equity, real estate, an important and building impact private equity investing business, and we also have a public market strategy as well. We have a hedge fund and a long only strategy inside the firm that was incubated inside the firm as well. And so that's kind of what it looks like now.
Good. That's a big organization. Obviously, you're going to be drawing on some skills that you learned at Goldman in your 27 years there. But rather than touch on that at the moment, I want to go much further back. I want to take you back to Millburn, New Jersey, right, where I understand you grew up. Tell us how you grew up, what it was like growing up in Jersey at that time period, some of your influences. Give us a sense of who you are and where you came from.
Sure. Well, I was from a suburban kind of, New Jersey town, about 25 miles from New York City. I grew up in a family of 4. I have a brother who is almost a couple of years older than me. We grew up in a household where, my dad worked in the car parking business in Newark, New Jersey, where he was from. And my mom was a school teacher, also from Newark, New Jersey. We grew up in a family where I'd say above all else, one of those families where education was a very strong, kind of principled focus in terms of, getting a good education, focusing, studying hard, getting good grades. All of that was expected of us. My parents, were those kind of parents where they were really kind of working for their next generation. They were sort of, they were doing everything to kind of make sure that their kids had a bigger opportunity. And it was really a great environment, frankly, to grow up in. We had good childhoods, and we worked hard, and it was all good.
So I can't imagine that you were walking around Millburn saying that you wanted to be the CEO of a private equity firm. But I know you had a dream. What'd you want to be? What were you shooting for?
That's a good question. I think that again, going back to my parents, they came from the generation where they really emphasized a couple of things. One is that you wanted to have a profession.
Yeah.
And also they emphasized this issue of, and I think it was part of that World War II generation where they weren't that keen about sort of like going to work for other people or working for a big organization. They were like, be a doctor or a lawyer. You
Right.
always have the skill. You can take it wherever you want, right? And that was very much of kind of like the ethic. And so I kind of thought about, that I when I was in high school and going into college, I was thinking, well, maybe studying law and being a lawyer would be a good move for me or whatever. I ended up going to college at the University of Chicago, where I went there because they gave me a bunch of scholarship money. I had to get financial aid to go to college.
Yep.
And they were very generous. And no one that I was growing up with ever went to school that far west.
Sure.
I mean, like everybody was, going to school in the Northeast.
Right.
The farthest anybody went was probably Pennsylvania.
Right.
And so I ended up going to Chicago, and it was a pretty extraordinary experience for me, and a very, very developmental experience for me in a number of respects, because I did not know what I was getting into, like the rigor of the school, how hard it was. I really had no sense of what I was getting into. And when I was there, that's when my horizon sort of started to open up. That's when my lens started to open up a little bit. But I wasn't certain that I was going to go to Wall Street or be involved in a private equity firm or anything like that until well into my college experience, when I started to get focused on business school. Yeah. And that's when it became a little bit clearer.
So you talked about your horizons opening up, and I think that's an important thing. I'm amazed when we interview college kids today for our internship programs, or if I have an opportunity to mentor high school kids, they seem to already know, right? They seem to have this clear picture. Who are some of the influences, the people you looked up to, and if you will, what did they teach you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my father was a big influence on me,
Yep.
a very big influence. He was very important to me in terms of shaping my work ethic, and just the whole idea of whatever you do, you kind of have to really try to be excellent at it. He had this theory where you can kind of do whatever you want to do. You just better be the best at it.
Yep.
So I always carried that with me. When I got to school and I started to get exposed to different things, I really, I had there were a number of classmates of mine actually that were not in my class, but senior to me at school, that began to open my eyes to a few different things. And then I had always had a little bit of an interest in Wall Street. Believe it or not, you're going to laugh when you hear this, because it has nothing to do with, much research or anything like that. But when I was a kid, my dad used to have to go on weekends to check out different locations, these parking locations in New York City. And some of them were down in the Wall Street area. And he used to drive me around these kind of, like the canyons of Wall Street. And I remember driving past the New York Stock Exchange and driving past, what was then kind of, JP Morgan's building. And I kind of got a little bit in the back of my mind. I was sort of always fascinated by it. Like, what goes on down there? How do you get there? So I had that little inkling in the back of my mind. And then when I ended up going to business school in this 5-year program at Chicago, where you could apply in your junior year to any of the grad schools. You could replace your senior year in college with your first year in graduate school. And when I got to business school, I then started to poke around and really become aware of what Wall Street was and what do these banks do versus investment banks, et cetera. And that's when I started to kind of hone in on the fact that maybe that environment would be an interesting environment to try. And I ended up getting a summer job at Goldman Sachs in between my years in business school. It was the summer of 1981. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. I can remember walking in there. I had a job. I was actually on the trading floor, and I was completely kind of captivated by the energy and sort of the pace of things.
Yeah.
fact that every single day when you walked into work, it was something different. It was new, there were different inputs and different, and that kind of changed my entire trajectory.
So summer of 81, you're at Goldman Sachs. The business world is different then, right? People wore white shirts and they wore suits and they hung their jackets up. And, what do you, if anything, what do you miss about those early days, the way business was, maybe even the way it impacted you? Is there anything you long for, not even long for, but miss about those days?
Well, I guess one thing that was great, and it still applies today, but not as much for me, I'm on the other side of it, is the mentorship that you got as a young person in an organization that was focused on human capital.
Yeah.
And people were really focused and incentivized on making you really good at what you do.
Yep.
And pushing you to be good at what you do and pushing you out into a place where maybe you're slightly outside your comfort zone,
Yeah.
or you're taking on a responsibility you may not be exactly ready to take on, right? But that's how you really evolve. And that was very true of the environment back then in a firm that, when I joined Goldman Sachs, there were like 2,300 people.
Yeah.
And when I left, it was like 35,000 people.
Right.
So that, being part of that evolution, and then at some point flipping to the other side, where now I was the person who was developing younger people, pushing younger people, and trying to help them move along and empower them in certain roles. And that was really, as far as I'm concerned, in a human capital organization, that was really the special sauce, where you created this environment where people felt like young people feel like they want to push on you to do, let me do more, give me more of this, give me more capital, let me try to build this business. That was really, I think, kind of the special sauce. And I still believe that today.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great answer. It's interesting to me that I hear you talk more about being good, being excellent. I hear competition in there. But what's nice is I don't hear money, right? So, doesn't sound like John Winkelried was chasing dollars back then as much as you were honing your craft. How do you, there's all this Maslow theory and all this other stuff. What drove you? Was it competing or was it the outcome of the performance?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that I didn't really, I positively 100% didn't think a lot about money, except for feeding myself. So I grew up in a household where my dad worked very hard, my mom worked very hard. It was really about like, it was just really a lot about like, can you provide for yourself? And it was clear in the house that I grew up in that you kind of, once you got out of the house, I was going to have to fend for myself. Right. Yeah. So, it was really like, and even though, we were far from having a lot of money, but I grew up in one of those places where I didn't feel like I needed anything else really. Sure. So when I was starting work myself, there's this embedded, I hate to keep coming back to it, but there's kind of this embedded voice in my head of like, you like be a success.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean for me? That, that meant doing a great job, progressing in my career, et cetera. I didn't really become that aware, to be honest with you, Bob, about money until later in my career, where, that came with doing a good job. And so, that was never really the motivating factor for me. And, but I've been very fortunate. So.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay. So I'm going to move you along into your Goldman days. And I want to ask really just one big Goldman question. And this is really for the young professionals out there that are watching. How did you choose assignments to grow your career, or were they chosen for you and you simply took those assignments, did your best, and competed. How did you manage the blend of career progression?
That's a fascinating question, because in my case, probably in the first 15 years of my career, actually even before that, in the first 10 years of my career, I made two moves that were basically motivated by, that were in part motivated by me seeing sort of a potential opportunity.
Yep.
And being willing to kind of like raise my hand,
okay,
or stick my neck out. And they were, so this question of kind of like, do you wait for it to come to you?
Yep.
Do you not? I think is a really important question. I think that the willingness to, at the right time and the right way, kind of raise your hand, talk to somebody about maybe another opportunity that you see where you could potentially add value, is an important thing to think about as you manage your career. I think very often it's kind of there for the taking, but people don't feel comfortable in doing that. They feel like if I actually raise my hand, then somebody's going to think I want to leave them, or I'm not kind of loyal to their business, or whatever it might be. Or if I raise my hand, maybe they'll think I'm not happy in my role, and so that'll kind of come back to hurt me. So, because I did that, when people come to me and say, "Hey, what about this opportunity?" or "How do you think?" I always embrace it, because it's really, I think that it shows something about kind of a young person's kind of desire and character about them willing to kind of take some level of risk to go do that. And the most important move that I made at Goldman Sachs was, I was a very young person, and I was in the capital markets group. I had been in banking.
Mm-hmm.
I had moved into capital markets, which was an important move. I moved up to the trading floor again in that capacity, and then there was a change in the structure of the business, where we were basically managing underwritings for companies, particularly on the debt side.
Yep.
And I remember I was having a conversation with one of my mentors, which is a guy named Steve Friedman, who actually ended up running the firm. And he asked me what we should do with that function. Yeah. And I was in his office, and I remember saying, "Well, I'm not really sure. Let me think about it." Yeah. I left the office that night. I remember I was home. I was actually lying in bed. I was lying in bed. My wife was there with me, and I was like, "Damn it!" I said, like, I should do that job. I should have thought I should do that job. And I said to myself, the next day I'm going in. I'm going to go back to see him, and I'm going to see him, and I'm telling him, "Listen, I'm the person for that job." And I did that. And I remember he was in his office. I went into his office. The person sitting next to him was Bob Rubin, okay, who also ended up running the firm. And he called Bob in, and he said, "Hey, John has this idea on this. He thinks he can do it." I was, I think, 27 years old.
Yeah.
And Rubin said, "Yeah, that's very interesting." And basically the two of them kicked me out of the office. And then about half an hour later, they called me and said, "Okay, the job's yours.
You got it."
And I ended up making partner in 1990 in that job as a result of that. So I think you got to try to, where you can, take control of sort of your destiny, if you will, a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's very insightful. So on mentors, sounds like you had some great ones. How did your best mentoring relationships, and you can define best, how did your best mentoring relationships form and evolve? And what advice do you have for young professionals on seeking and attaining mentors?
Well, my best mentor relationships were positively with people that pushed me. Mm-hmm. And they were very, very far from coddlers. I mean, they pushed me. They held me to a very high standard. I mean, another example of that is Hank Paulson was a mentor of mine, and actually I have the great fortune of actually working with him again now, because we brought him into the firm to help us with our new climate strategy at TPG. But Hank became a very close mentor of mine. And I remember this was in 1999, and he asked me to move to Europe, to London, to run our trading businesses internationally. And I said to him, I remember talking to him, and he said to me, we want you to go do this. And I went home and I talked to my wife about it, and I kind of had an idea. I would go in and I would say, I'm willing to go, but on the following condition, that if the following things happen, that you assure me or guarantee me that this is going to happen.
So you're playing hardball with Hank Paulson.
I'm playing hardball, which lasted about 15 seconds.
Right.
And he turned around, he looked at me, and he basically said, why would I ever do that?
Right.
He said, like, you have, you've done a great job. You've grown, you've evolved, but you haven't proven yourself as a leader in the context of a bunch of businesses that you didn't grow up in. At that point, I was running all the credit businesses of the firm. I grew up in it. And I was now going to Europe to run the entire trading operation, which included things like currency and commodities, macro, the macro businesses like, government bonds, derivatives, things like that. So he said, it's one thing to be a leader in a business you've kind of grown up in organically. It's another thing to be relevant as a leader to a bunch of people that know a lot more about their businesses than you'll ever know. And I thought about that, and I said, he's probably right about that. And I have to say he was dead right about it, because when I went there to do that, I did go. I caved, and I went there to do it. And, it was probably the best experience from a management growth experience that I ever had, because I really did have to think through, how do I lead a much broader group of people? And that, I carry a lot of those tools with me today.
Yeah. So 27 years, intern to president, you made partner, it sounds like in 9 to 10 years, you had a tremendous amount of success. 49 years old, you retire. You're doing other things for a number of years, and then you get the phone call. Tell us about the TPG phone call.
Well, the TPG phone call came as a result of me have developed a bit of sort of like a side relationship with TPG. What happened is that one of a partner of mine from Goldman had left to go to TPG to build their credit business. Alan Waxman, who built the Sixth Street Partners business. And Alan asked me to be an advisor to Sixth Street Partners, because he and I had worked very closely together when he was running the special situations group at Goldman. And I was the division head. I was running what we call FIC. And so we had worked very closely together. We had a good relationship. We still have a good relationship. And he asked me to be an advisor. So I did that because it was also an opportunity for me to invest alongside. And I was basically at that point trying to figure out how to run kind of my own family office.
Yep.
And so anyway, that was my initial kind of connection. And then as TPG was evolving in 2015, a couple of things were happening. One was David Bonderman was becoming somewhat less active in the business and becoming chair and went to become chairman. Jim was then really the sole CEO of the business.
Yep.
And the business was at an important growth stage and inflection stage in its growth curve, because there were a number of businesses out. The core of the business originally was TPG Capital, which was the buyout business. Yep. Then there were a series of other businesses that were added to it and began to be incubated and grown. And we were at that point in 2015 where a lot of those businesses were starting to hit their stride, but still had more to go. Yep. And all of a sudden, the firm was turning into a multi-strategy, more complex organization, where growth became, more important and more strategic. And so the ability to manage all of that started to get more challenging. So they had a conversation among the partners at TPG saying, maybe we need some assistance to run this business. And if we were to do that, who should it be? And Alan basically said at the time to David and Jim, you should probably call this guy. He's had a career doing this kind of stuff, and he's run a lot of different businesses, and he's worked in organizations that are, really human capital organizations. And so give him a call. So that's
Did he have any idea whether you'd be interested?
Alan called me in advance and said, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't think that I would do it, but, I don't know. And, and again, I was at a point where I was trying to figure out this family office thing. And also I was on the East Coast, not on the West Coast. And, one thing I knew is I didn't want to go back into the same kind of position that I left, okay, in a big organization. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know whether I wanted to go back full time. But as I got more into the dialogue with Jim, with David, with others at the firm, with other partners at the firm, it began to become clearer to me that the platform was a really interesting platform. It was at a very interesting stage of its evolution. I felt my skill set would be very additive. I also, again, talking to my wife about it, we talked about the idea of moving to the West Coast. And, we never lived in the Bay Area, but there's an awful lot of interesting stuff going on in the Bay Area. And again, it's this, for me, it was all about like, do I have another big kind of like push in me? At that point, I was 55. And like, I was, okay, do I have another push in me? If in fact I conclude I do, getting out of my comfort zone, getting in a place where my learning curve steepens again, being in more of an investing environment, which is really what I was interested in, was becoming more interesting. Yeah. And so as a result of that, I decided my wife and I, we decided to do it. So we moved to San Francisco, and we've been there for, 5.5 years now.
So what I'm sure every TPG employee is familiar with now is what is John trying to do? What's the mission you accepted, and how are you going about executing or prosecuting that?
Well, I would say that, that there was a lot about TPG, particularly from a cultural perspective, that was really, really good. And so how could I continue to sort of leverage off that and improve that? There also, I think this whole concept, getting back to a theme that keeps recurring here, is sort of excellence and demanding excellence of ourselves. And I think that, at TPG, we want to be something that's distinctive. Okay. There's a bunch of different firms in this industry, and a number of them, Bob, are distinctive. And we want to be one of those organizations. We want to have a distinctive culture, environment. We want to have a distinctive track record on investing. We want to be when investors who invest with us think of us, we want them to think that TPG does something distinctive and interesting, and there's a reason why I'm invested with them. And so I think from a high level, we have been driving that kind of strategy overlay in everything we do. We feel like growing, we feel like growth and furthering the development of the firm in interesting parts of the asset class is important, because our business has evolved into lots of sector focused, meaning you need to be deep in certain sectors. And the other thing it's evolved into is much more of what I would call sort of a capital solutions mindset. Yeah. Which is that you need to have multiple pools of capital to respond to opportunity, because you might meet a great founder, CEO, you might meet a great company. Their need may not exactly match a product. Like, for instance, if you have a control buyout bias in a fund, they may not want to control investment. Right. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to develop various pools of capital that allow us to be the capital partner of choice to interesting CEOs, interesting founders, interesting companies, and that we don't find opportunities that end up basically, if that we can't prosecute. And so we've tried to grow into places where we feel like it furthers our competitive advantage and furthers our distinctiveness. As an example, like the last buyout fund we launched, we raised a sidecar alongside of it that focuses explicitly on healthcare, because we're arguably one of the best healthcare investors in the private markets in the world. And so we decided we should double down on that and give our investors an opportunity to size up with us as it relates to the healthcare opportunities, because we just think it's such an important space in the market. Another example is in our technology franchise, we raised a strategy that we call tech adjacencies, where we were finding opportunities to invest with founders and invest with companies, but it didn't exactly match the structure of what we classically do in, say, a growth equity fund. So we raised a pool of capital to do that. And then lastly, 5 years ago, we started a really important new part of our business, which is impact investing. And so we raised the first Rise fund about 4.5 years ago, and which was about a $2 billion fund. And as the world has evolved and has continued, we've now raised the second Rise fund, but now Jim and Hank Paulson together are raising our first Rise Climate Fund, which is going to be a large private pool of capital focused on investing in climate-related solutions. And so we're continuing to expand our leadership in that space. So that's an example of kind of how we've built into growth, where it's relevant and where it's consistent with what our real strengths are.
Yeah, and the logic is also observable, right? I mean, healthcare, technology, climate. We all know that these things. I mean, you can't do an important word cloud and not see those major themes swirling through it. So obviously, you're figuring out how to leverage TPG's capabilities and capacity to get into those opportunities.
Exactly. Yep.
So I want to take a quick moment and actually compliment you. And I'm not a journalist, so I'm not making myself the story or being a part of it, but I want to compliment you on your team. I've had, in full disclosure, I think everybody knows, TPG and NAIC entered into a partnership that we announced about 6 weeks ago. It was a part of your TPG NEXT initiative. And before we talk about TPG NEXT, I just want to talk about your team members that I've had the pleasure of working with, starting with Anilu Vasquez-Ubari. I know that you knew her and worked with her at Goldman. She was fabulous in terms of working with us, working with my COO, Carmen. The word that I use a lot when I talk to people about diversity is being intentional. And she was her normal, highly intelligent, focused self, but she was just very intentional. There never seemed to be a doubt that what she was trying to build with us was exactly what TPG wanted. She then introduced us to Justin Nunez. Again, same type of person, same caliber, quality, very focused and hands-on. And the final person was Liz Stiverson, who I understand is actually in your office. So in a world where people are struggling to figure out diversity, we see this team from TPG coming towards us, and they don't come to it with all the answers, but they do come to it with a sensibility around what they want to do, what their capabilities are, what their firm wants to achieve, and that enables them to get to the right answer. So I want to compliment you, John, and your team. They're a pleasure to work with, and I think that says a lot about your firm and how you're leading.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you saying that, and I really appreciate you recognizing the quality of those people. Those three people are great examples of that focus and intentionality, and great examples of wanting to really demand and achieve excellence in what we're doing, and do it in a way that's different, thoughtful, out of the box. Just, not to correct you, but just, it's interesting to note that I actually didn't work directly with Anilu at Goldman. We kind of just missed one another. And the way I got to Anilu was that another partner at Goldman, actually one of their women partners at Goldman, called me when they found out, I think, that Anilu was considering doing some other things.
Okay.
And this person said to me, and I was a mentor of this other person.
Okay.
This person called me and said, listen, like everything you value in somebody, everything you think, this is the person. So like, get on it.
Yeah.
And so I didn't waste any time.
Yeah.
And I got on it. And I remember we had TPG, we had a sort of a offsite conference to celebrate the 25th anniversary of TPG.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I asked her to fly out to that conference, and we locked her in a conference room, and a bunch of people interviewed her, and we made her a job offer as our chief people person, our CHRO. And
yeah,
she's been an incredible contributor. Justin, has been amazingly passionate about this issue of not only diversity, but the commercial dynamics around how you fit diversity into the organization, how you live it in a real way.
Yep.
And he's been an amazing source of energy.
Yeah.
And just as an example on that, by the way, because I want to call this out, in the last couple of years, our new associate classes that we've hired have been 50% diverse.
Wow.
And Justin Nunez basically single-handedly, this is going back now 3 to 4 years ago, basically decided that he was going to take on a project of connecting with most of the Black associates that were on Wall Street that were looking for the next step by working his network through LinkedIn and sending out messages. And then he would call me to come to New York, and basically invited them all in, had a breakfast meeting with all these folks, got to know them early, so that basically we were positioning ourselves where they knew who TPG was. And did an incredible job of really single-handedly kind of changing the momentum of our recruiting. And then Liz, obviously, who's actually the chief of staff for Jim and I. When I got to the firm, the anecdote on Liz is when I walked into the door at the firm, and Liz said she was going to a diversity committee meeting. And I said, well, what's the diversity committee at TPG?
Right. And
she said, oh, it's something I started. And I said, well, who's the senior sponsor, or who's the executive office sponsor? Because I was used to that from my days at Goldman. And she said, what are you talking about? There's no senior sponsor. And I said, okay, well, I'm now your executive office sponsor. So great people, and it's led obviously to the development of TPG NEXT.
Yeah. So what is TPG NEXT? What are you trying to do there, and how does it all fit into TPG as a firm?
So what we ended up, in the context of how we think about equity, diversity, and making TPG a more inclusive organization, we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we change the texture, the culture of the organization, and really, not only change the way the firm feels and the way the firm values those issues, but also think through some of the problems that exist in our industry. And one of the fundamental problems, and I was actually thinking about this the other day because I was reading about the 1 year anniversary. I was looking at the 1 year anniversary of George Floyd's death. And there were a number of observations that people were making, which I thought were really interesting about the way people talk about racial diversity. And there's been a lot of knock-on effects of that are pretty interesting. But one of the the interesting aspects of that is this whole concept of systemic diversity, systemic racism, and sort of systemic inequalities in the system is very much at the core of this, because when you think about who sits in the seat of being capital allocators, when you think about the private market, obviously there's a lot written and there's a lot of data about the fact that minority entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs, LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs, Latino or Latinx entrepreneurs, women don't receive as much capital historically as white males do. And when you start to dig into it, what you also realize is that those of us that are committing capital and flowing capital to these different opportunities are doing so based upon how we source deals, how we think about our, we source deals through our networks.
Yep.
We source deals through people we know. We go out and we meet people and develop relationships. And we all know that there is a distinct tendency to have a bias to develop relationships with people that look like us. Okay. Yeah. And so the flywheel effect of that occurring is such that capital flows in certain directions as a result of that. So I think we felt like there were some more interesting things to do as it relates to this question of who sits in the capital allocator seat. And so as a result of that, we started to think about whether or not there were ways of helping develop and propel diverse investors into seats as capital allocators where they have greater pools of capital and have a greater impact on how that capital flows. And so we started thinking about that. Anilu actually had a relationship that predated her coming to the firm with the first group of people that we decided to try to experiment with, which was the Harlem Capital team. Mm-hmm. And so Anilu developed a dialogue there, began to introduce me and others at the firm. And we sort of stumbled, frankly, on this idea of, should we create some kind of either a pool of capital where we can seed these types of managers, we can accelerate their fundraising activity, we can basically really just accelerate their development as capital allocators, and help them get to sort of launch speed, if you will, much faster. And so we all met with them. We started to talk to them about what their goals and ambitions were. The more we got into it, by the way, the thing that was really fascinating, the thing that we realized is that when you look at how the Harlem team, and by the way, this is true of other teams that we've now met, when you look at how they source opportunities, what we found, which was really interesting, is that there's a lot of they have visibility and connectivity to a bunch of opportunities which we as TPG would never really see.
That's right.
Because their networks are different, their source of connectivity is different. I mean, for instance, the Harlem team uses their social engagements, their social media engagements with a whole series of people out there that are Black founders and women founders. Yep. That are really not in our network naturally. They're at a different cohort age-wise. And so it was clear that not only was it good business for us to help folks like that become to ramp up faster in terms of being capital allocators, but we also may very well see and discover things that we really didn't see or discover before because our networks are fundamentally different. So bringing that closer into the firm was something that also became part of the objective of doing this. So we ended up investing in Harlem Capital, both in the management company as well as in their fund. We ended up helping them capital raise, and their first fundraise ended up being quite a bit larger than they had originally thought it was going to be. Yep. As a result of that, we also created something called the Harlem Council internally, which is a group of people that are on the deal side of the business that they can actually access when they want to talk about a particular company, particular industry, help them see around corners. And then, but the real kind of proof of the pudding is that they have now launched and successfully raised their second fundraise, and they've raised over $130 million for their second fundraise. That is a real, honest to goodness, professionally sized seeding fund, early stage venture capital fund. And these guys are off and running, doing it themselves. Yeah. And so we've now, so as a result of that, we've gotten a lot of inbounds. We've now decided, how can we sort of institutionalize this effort? And so we've decided that we're going to create a more formalized effort around it that we've launched called TPG NEXT. We are talking to some capital partners to potentially invest capital in TPG NEXT as a fund structure of some sort to really kind of leverage it and get to the next level and have other people participate with us. We've done 2 other seeding related deals. One with a Latinx founder, Vamos Ventures.
Yep.
And another with a Black-led real estate investing effort. And in that one, we did something unique, which is we created what we called entrepreneurs in residence. And so the founders of that business have become employees of TPG for a year. And then after a year, they will spin back out to continue running their own firm. So those are 3 examples of what we've done so far. We've got quite a bit of pipeline, and we're very proud of the effort. The other rewarding part of it is that there's been a lot of engagement from TPG people, which further sort of broadens the scope of how people look at this issue of diversity, of equity, diversity, how people look at this question of who's in the capital allocator seat. How do we help really broaden the definition of that?
So, John, if I'm a 48-year-old white male working for TPG, I've grown up in the firm. You guys recruited me out of school. I've done an outstanding job. I have gotten a lot of deals done. I'm a star in the firm. I'm looking at the TPG NEXT piece, and I don't see the normal, for lack of a better term, trial or tokenism associated with it. It seems to be very, very important to you and central to you. But I muster the courage to come share with you my concern that it's hard for me to understand where the firm is going. Assuming that I'm not putting words in your mouth, how do you make that guy feel a part of diversity? Because that's really what's lacking in the world. We can't get successful white males to care about diversity and want to participate in it. How do you, as frankly, a guy a generation ahead of him with power and authority over him, how do you make him understand how he's a part of that?
Well, I think, a couple of different thoughts on that. One is that this whole idea of sort of like the Harlem Council, how do you get people to embrace these kinds of ideas? It's a lot more about experience than it is telling them, right? And so, if you have an individual like you described who's in the firm, who might be sort of let's say they're in the tech group.
Okay.
You ask them to be part of the Harlem Council, as an example.
Yep.
And the Harlem guys come to him and say, hey, we're looking at a software-based business that does the following. Love your thoughts on it, right? The engagement process that somebody like that has with that team is really a secret special ingredient, because first of all, people really enjoy mentoring, teaching, helping.
Yep.
I think it's a fundamental kind of human trait. All right. People really enjoy it. So all of a sudden there's this connection that develops. Secondly, in part of being an investor is having broad aperture, not getting tunnel visioned, and having intellectual curiosity. And so all of a sudden you see a kind of a business model that's brought to you. Okay. And it's generally also pretty intriguing. I mean, the investors, and the people that work at TPG enjoy kicking the tires on sort of new kind of business models or new or different opportunities. And so all of a sudden they find themselves engaging in a way that both is in certain respects is both mission based, but also actually core to what they do. Yeah. And now they realize, hey, maybe my aperture, okay, is not quite as broad as I thought it was. And maybe there's a way of doing this more regularly or connecting, which is actually valuable to me. And by the way, it's interesting. It's just interesting. So part of the dynamic about that is that when you get people with either different ethnicities or, different backgrounds, right? Where they're now coming together at the table, do what they do in the normal course. I think it fundamentally shifts people's kind of radar as it relates to what does it mean to be part of an organization that has a diverse collection of individuals around it. And why is that interesting? Why is it more interesting than being in a homogeneous environment?
Right.
Well, maybe we'll see different things or experience different things. I think that now on top of that, we obviously talk about our values as a firm and what's important to us as a firm. And I think people hear that and I think they intellectually appreciate it, but it's different than when you actually experience it, where you're engaging in that way. We had after a year ago, after the breakout of kind of the racial justice movement, we did a series of roundtables internally at TPG, where we had about 30 different roundtables where people would sign up, and you had small groups of TPGers getting together, talking about race, talking about their experiences, things like that. That interaction and that exchange really changes people's awareness of, and we're actually, to celebrate the kind of anniversary of that, we're actually starting a series of roundtables, a second series of roundtables now. But anyway, that's it's a holistic engagement process that really, I think, affects how people embrace the concept.
So we've talked about TPG NEXT. We've talked about ethnic diversity. What is TPG doing around women and promoting women, creating a more inclusive environment where women can bring all of themselves to the firm?
Well, I think that we've thought about the gender diversity issue in a number of ways and on a number of fronts. First of all, within our own population, we are fighting we're fighting the fight, as many other people are, in terms of trying to focus on the pipeline of women that are moving through our organization.
Yep.
We're better represented at the more in the lower half of our population from a seniority perspective than we are at the top half, although we're getting better for sure, but we still have a lot of work to do. We have a number of women in key leadership positions in the firm. Obviously, Anilu is one of them we mentioned before. Liz in her role, Joanne Harris, who's our head of compliance. We have a number of senior women investors in the firm now, in our growth franchise, in our Asia franchise, and our capital franchise. So we're improving in that respect, and it's a high priority for us. The other thing that we've done as it relates to gender diversity is we have found it very useful to take a more holistic view of kind of how do we think about gender diversity, and I should say diversity generally, but how do we think about gender diversity across the entire ecosystem of TPG? That's a very important leap for us, because TPG is definitely more than the 1,000 employees. We think of the firm as inclusive of many, many other relationships, including the leadership of our portfolio companies that we have a lot of interaction with. And so one of the things that we found going back now about 3 years is we found that the boards of our portfolio companies, the governance structures of our portfolio companies, were well underrepresented with women than what you find in the public markets, as an example.
Okay.
So we undertook an initiative to dramatically change the diversity of our boards of our portfolio companies. And we set a goal that we were going to change within 2 years. We were going to add at least one woman, and in some cases we have added more, to every board of every portfolio company that we either control or have substantial influence over. And I've actually lost count now, but in the 2.5 to 3 years that we undertook this board diversity initiative, we have added about 105 women to the boards of our portfolio companies. And the process of doing it, so that's an important milestone in and of itself. Many of our portfolio companies now, by the way, have multiple women on the boards, of course, and have other forms of diversity represented in that same initiative. And we're now broadening the definition of the initiative to a broader form of diversity. And that's a system. But what we've done in that process, and this is the important part, is we've engaged all of our deal partners. We've asked them to drive the initiative within their portfolio companies. That's number one. Number two is we've systematically created an extraordinary, I use the word database, but we've systematically created an extraordinary pool of women who want to serve on a private company board. Some of them have, some of them haven't. Some of them serve public company boards, some of them haven't, but want to be part of our ecosystem and want to be engaged in this because they find the experience of sitting around on the table, the governing body of a private company with private equity involved in the company in terms of creating value and driving enhanced value as being a terrific development and learning and engagement experience. And so the quality of women that we've added, the quality of director we've added to our boards is pretty extraordinary. And the interaction that all of our deal partners have now had as a result of actually helping accomplish this and now working with them side by side. And we have a lot of board meetings with our portfolio companies. It's monthly, it's weekly, that again has created an experience of engagement that is changing how people think about the importance of having a diverse group of people fundamentally around the table, regardless of what we're doing. Yeah. So that's been another very important part of how we think about being an inclusive environment. Yeah. And kind of getting it in getting it into the DNA of the organization.
Yeah. John, again, my compliments to you, and I mean this sincerely, around your work on diversity. You guys are doing a lot of things right at TPG, but it's very, very clear what you're doing around diversity. And it's also clear how much it matters to you. And you and I both know when it matters to the CEO, it's going to matter to everybody else. So my compliments there. I've got just two other quick questions, and I'm going to get you out of here. The first question is around, we have a lot of young professionals, a lot of grad students who look at these and gain exposure. A number of them saw the interview we did with Robert and Jarvis and Melody. What advice would you give to young people who want to work for TPG? What are you looking for? What do they need to be in order for you guys to want to hire them?
Well, I think there's several characteristics. I mean, I think first of all, again, going back this kind of passion to be excellent and this passion to succeed, I think is kind of table stakes. Yeah. I think a genuine, strong intellectual curiosity around what does it mean to be a great investor. Yeah. That is, and by the way, even if you're not directly involved in, say, an investing team. Yeah. I mean, the ethos of the organization is about investing and investing well and creating value for our LPs. So even if that's not the mainstream of what you're involved in day to day, intellectual curiosity and desire to be around that is still quite important. I would also say the ability to be comfortable putting yourself into sometimes a less comfortable place, because you're not going to know everything when you first walk in the door, and so you've got to be willing to kind of go out on that kind of diving board a little bit and look down into the water and say, okay, it's okay. I'm going to take a shot. Yeah. And so I would say that, those are some of the key things that I think, people need to bring with them.
So, John, when we first began the conversation, you talked about your parents and you talked about them sacrificing to give you and your brothers and sisters a better life, give you the opportunities that your talents would allow you to pursue. What are the things that you are trying to impart to your kids who are growing up in a much different situation economically, but nonetheless, we all have great aspirations for our kids and use our best minds and talents to teach them. What are the lessons you're trying to teach your kids? If you'd share any of those, we'd be grateful.
Yeah, sure. I think, my wife, Abby, and I talk about this, pretty frequently. And one of the things that always makes us feel great is when people say to us, you guys raised your kids right. Their values and what kind of people they are. Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing that resonates with us is when people talk about our children from the perspective that they're kind, and that they're giving. Mm-hmm. And I think that for us has probably been at the top of the list. Yeah. I think about the way we raised our kids, slightly differently than the way I was raised, because times change and, sort of the environment changes and whatnot. And obviously, the dynamics of the sort of the economic dynamic that my kids have grown up in is different than the economic environment that I grew up in. Sure. But I think our kind of first and foremost focus has been making sure that they're tolerant people, that whatever they choose to do, they do well, and whatever it is. And none of my kids actually, as they went through their kind of college ages, were particularly interested in kind of following my path, in terms of finance or private equity, and that wasn't important to us. So I would say that was really, frankly, the highest priority for us in terms of how they evolved as people and individuals.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you for sharing that. I asked the question as if you had young kids and you kind of had to think about it a bit because your kids are older. But I really appreciate your candor today. I appreciate the generous method in which you shared your time. I also really appreciate your partnership in working with us at NAIC. I'm highly confident that we're going to achieve great things together, and appreciate you having faith in us to do it. Thank you very much, John Winkelried.
Bob, thanks, and thanks for being willing to extend yourself and the NAIC to partner with us, because I think it's very meaningful to us. It's meaningful to our effort with TPG NEXT, and I think that I agree with you. We'll do some interesting things together. So thanks again.
Awesome. Take care of yourself, John. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bob. Great. Talk to you later.